Hi, in this video we'll talk about the things that you need to look for or look out for when you're looking at data in terms of communication or for communication. So the first thing which is extremely important and is that data does not create meaning, people do. And this is basically at the heart of any communication plan that you would have, and you have to be aware of it. So it works both ways. First is the sources from which you are getting your data. You have to be aware of the biases. You have to be aware of the problems that are there inherently. Also about the positives that go along with it. And in the same breath, you have to also communicate these biases to your readers or to your uh, stakeholders. So whenever you're dealing with data, and this is where I'll again revisit the flowchart a little bit. So logically, what happens with flowchart is that there'll be one or two primary sources of data that you'll be working with, or for any communication, there'll be one or two primary sources of information or data sets or headline figures that we call in journalism parlance that you'll be leading with. So basically, they will allow you to garner the maximum support or maximum visits. So you have to be extremely cautious about the data sets. Why was the data created and how reliable it is. So if you want to make an exaggerated or if you want to make a headline impact, then it is at times much better to lead with numbers that are given by the government. So one classic example is when we started working on State of India's environment in figures, we were very clear right from the outset that if we are trying to see India's progress, which would invariably end up also looking at how the government has performed, uh, it makes much more sense to rely on government data and analyze government data. So to look at the positives and the negatives in different environmental and different sectors. So you have to be very clear about the government sources. So there have been times when there are more relevant or more recent surveys done by other organizations on a particular topic. Uh, but we still go with the government data primarily because we are talking about government and its performance in one way or the other. So you have to look at it. You have to be very careful about the source, especially in today's age and time, and especially with the onset of the social media and WhatsApp and Twitter and the fake news thing that is going around. So you have to be very careful about how you, because especially when you're talking about communication, every communication expert would tell you that it takes a lot of small efforts to build a brand or get audiences, and one small wrong move, one typo here or there, or one number that is unverified and is controversial might lead to the downfall or might undo the entire process. And this is even more true when you're dealing with data, because it's basically one number gone here or there. And one nice way of going about it, and this is something that we are very careful of, how was it created, the sample size, and the duration for the data source, duration for the period that was that went behind getting the data. So this is one of the primary reasons why whenever we at Down to Earth or in CSE look at communication or look at any idea, so we give the idea the most importance as and not the data. The basic idea is exactly the same. So if your message is being told through, let's say, a piece of information that the government has come out with, even if the data is slightly dated, you are good with it. One classic example is, and this is something that I was able to see this time around. So when we were working on this year's SON figures, it usually comes in July 5th. At that point in time, COVID, so the migration was at its peak. People were literally walking back home, and we were trying to gauge the migration trend, the reverse migration trend. And there were a few NGOs which were working on grassroots level, and they were generating some numbers. That was just about the time when the Shramik train had started, and the government was giving out half-baked, very cryptic kind of messages on how brilliantly they are working, to the extent that they would mention the number of trains that were plying initially, but they would not tell the number of people who were being taken back home, so that no questions can be asked in terms of how much reverse migration was happening. So at that point in time, we relied on census 2011 data, where they talk about migration and how many people have actually migrated from their hometowns and villages and rural areas to urban areas. And the broad trend that had emerged in that 2011, many months later, when the reverse migration scenario was pretty clear, the predictions that we were able to get from the 2011 data was exactly the same as it was right now. So basically, the people who moved out of their places in 2011 were actually the people who were going back. And it makes sense, even if we ask any Indian, we know which are the states from where people have moved to, and which are the states where people have actually settled down. So so the basic idea is the obsession, or the importance, or the emphasis on data is primarily to get trends. And the good thing is that trends don't change overnight. So you don't always have to be on the lookout for the most updated piece of information. So trends normally, and especially when you're dealing with a country as big as India, trends do not change overnight. So that is another thing that is important. And there have been times, I would also like to give another example over here. So I remember a couple of years back, we were doing a story on when the beef controversy was at its peak. So the story that Down to Earth came out with was that how the existing legal framework for meat shops and meat and slaughterhouses in the country is so stringent that even government slaughterhouses are not applying the guidelines properly. So it is impossible to have a legally correct or a legally abiding slaughterhouse in India. So we obviously went through through what the law says, and we had some sampling in terms of some people going and reporting from ground zero. Then we were able to find only one survey that was conducted by an NGO, a very lesser known NGO, and the sample size was also very low. However, the message that it was giving was exactly what we wanted to say. So under normal circumstances, we would not have carried it, because it is very difficult to verify the merit of the NGO. But in this case, because we did not have any other numbers and we did not have any other research to go to fall back on, so we gave that headline figure. However, in the same sentence, or in the following sentence, we made it amply clear that there are some inherent limitations in this research, and where we talked about how the sample size is very limited, and that it is being done by an organization which is not very verifiable. However, we said that the findings are in line with what our reporters have got from ground zero. So it isn't that if a number is so basically it's coming back to the same thing. So you have to know what your message is, and you have to be very careful about the numbers and the source and the how they originate, or from where they originate. So you should interview your numbers the way you would interview a source or when you are trying to look at something new. So at least the important pieces of information that you're dealing with. So if you have multiple sources from which you're coming, you're building your communication or your article or your report, at least the most important or the highlight figures, you have to be extremely careful about it. One way of going about is that you get it checked from multiple sources. If it is a number on how, let's say, the tiger population in India and how it is moving, you have to speak to experts to get a good feedback on in terms of the way you're headed. Specifically, every time I am analyzing data and I come across something very interesting or something very abnormal, I always make it a point to cross-verify it with experts in the field. So whenever we're thinking about analyzing data for communication, we try to put our stories or our communication material in broadly three kinds of trends, or the three kinds of stories. So the first one being an outlier story. So the idea over here is that whenever you are looking at your numbers and whenever you are you're cleaning it up and you're analyzing it, try to think about about putting out your number in this way. So an outlier story is when a value is different from all the others. So which city has the least crime, or why do students from the school have such good grades? So rankings is another example of that. Or this was a headline that came out a couple of years back, that a couple in Gujarat got married in just 500 rupees. So if you look at it, they are basically all of these the structuring of the story or the product would be exactly the same. The language would be different. So outlier story or is the first story option. The other is the trend story, basically pattern, basically all the line graphs and the bar graphs that we come up with. Crime has been decreasing over the last 10 years, or has rabies deaths in India increased over the years? So this is the other one. And then there are some correlation stories. The most obvious correlation is that one thing is leading to the other. So an example of this is X is leading to Y or causing Y is more smoking causes cancer, or people buy more umbrellas when it's raining. So this is the most popular kind of correlation that exists. There are many other kinds of correlation, like Y is being caused by X, Y causes X, or both of them have an impact on each other, or an external factor like Z is causing both of them. And finally, which is most often the case when there is something alarming, is that it is a random chance. So the way I go about is, if you are dealing with a subject matter that you work with, there is a very high chance that you would know if it is random or not. And when I'm thinking about structuring my communication content, I try to put everything in one of these structures. So let's look at this. So over here, if you look at it, it's a simple graph on. Over here, we have the homicide rate per 100,000 people in countries across the world. And over here, it is basically guns per 100 people. So I'm basically, the idea is to show that data does not create meaning, people do. So if you look at this number, you basically see that both of them are going up. So basically, homicide rate and guns per 100 people is going up. So what kind of stories can you possibly come up with? There are two stories that I could come up with. One is that if you have a gun, you're likely to use it, which is basically places where there is high density of guns, there is high homicide rate. The same thing can also be using the same piece of information. You can also say that if you're living in a dangerous locality, you will buy a gun. Now, this is where experience come into play. So if you know, you would know if it is a thing from your field of expertise, which of the two is correct. But this piece of data can be used to tell both of these stories. One is that if you have easy access to guns, there would be higher homicide rates. And if you are living in a very dangerous locality, there is a very high likelihood that you would have a gun. There might be other ways of looking at it. I would urge all of you to also think about what are the other ways you can look at the data. The assumption is that we are only looking at this data and we're not adding more data to it. If we do that, then there'll be a lot of other interpretations as well. This is another example, and at the outset I will tell you that this is not made up numbers, and there was actually a report that came out where if you look at it, over here is basically Nobel laureates per 10 million population. So basically the density of Nobel laureates in different countries, and this is the chocolate consumption, per capita chocolate consumption in those countries. So if you look at it, it's the same concept again. Countries which have high chocolate consumption, per capita chocolate consumption, also have produced more Nobel laureates in the past, as opposed to China, Brazil for that matter. So if this was the only piece of information that you had, what are the likely stories that you can possibly come up with? I'll give you the examples that I could come up with. One is that chocolates make you smarter. That is the most obvious X leading to Y kind of scenario. And if I were doing a campaign, a communication campaign for Cadbury, I'm confident my bosses would be extremely happy with this graph. The other, this is a very NGO kind of a perspective to the entire thing, is that if you look at the countries, the developed countries are the ones who have a lot of Nobel laureates, and at the same time, chocolate is an expensive commodity, and not everybody has access to it. So the higher income or the development level of the country dictates both of these and influences both of these. So basically higher income makes you eat more chocolate, or you can afford more chocolate, and at the same time higher income can fund better education, or you have better access to good education. So that leads to this graph, or that is the reason why this graph is moving the way it is. This is another example. The per capita cheese consumption, the pink line over here is basically the per capita cheese consumption of an area that is going up. And at the same time, the number of vegetarian people in that area over the years. And if you look at it, more or less, both of them are going up. So the cheese consumption is in pounds, the unit, the weighing unit, and the number of vegetarian population is in million. So there is it looks like there is a direct correlation between the two. And the first time that I thought about it, maybe because of the bias that I am Bengali, and I basically have a lot of non-vegetarian food. So the first instance I looked at it, I was like, there can't be any correlation between the two. But I'm confident people who are vegetarians, they might or they might not see a trend between the two, that people are becoming more vegetarian, and cheese is one of the popular vegetarian alternative. So the consumption of cheese is also going up. Another example could be this: the number of drowning cases is increasing in town X when the consumption of ice cream is increasing. So stories around it, it can also be that there's a random chance. But I remember in one of the workshops where I had this PPT, one of the participants had said the same thing: you consume more ice creams during the summer season. You also go closer to or you go to water bodies during the summer season. So it is basically the summer season which is triggering both of them, and which makes a lot of sense again. So this is important, that just because there is a correlation does not mean that one is triggering the other, and you have to be very careful about it. But in my experience, what I've seen is that we usually have a hunch of where we are going off in terms of where we are exaggerating the correlation and where we know it is true. So some of the hard truths about visualization or about communication is, and this is something that we will realize in the final state, but when you're analyzing, this is something that you should try to keep in mind, is that only a small amount of raw data will finally be used for visualization. So don't get fixated or don't fall in love with the raw data, and don't try to cram in too much information. So you have to prioritize your raw data. The other is that you should always give a context, even if it seems unnecessary, because there'll be a lot of times when it looks extremely unnecessary, but it never is. So you have to explain things no matter who the target audience is. The language might differ because of the target audience, but you have to give context to everything. Whenever you are using big numbers, try to give a reference for correlation. Basically, instead of giving, so one way of going about is you explain a tract of land in terms of how many football fields it would be, or how many cricket fields it will be. So that basically helps us in visualizing. So that that is one thing. So especially Indians, especially people from developing countries, even in Africa, my experience has been we do not think visually. One classic example of this is that when we talk about, let's say, which box to get, or which box to buy from the market, or which bucket to buy from the market, we usually refer to, within our family, we usually refer to it as, please get the big basket or the small basket from the market. We don't say so many liters and so many liters. So we instinctively do not think about numbers and think and are able to visualize it. So it makes sense to give references for correlation, simpler references for correlation, in terms of, let's say, the size of an area vis-a-vis the size of Delhi. So if it is, so if we talk about how much of forest land gets eroded every year in India, and if we are able to say that it is basically the size of Delhi, or basically the size of any other state, so that basically gives you an idea of how big the crisis is. The other thing that we normally do look at is, so the assumption over here is that a communication plan requires multiple entries into with the same message to have a desired impact. So the first time you tell the story, it might or might not reach to the target audience. So you have to have multiple entries and revisit the story or revisit the message over and over again. So there are side stories that you can look for. So money or the scale of operations involved in the main story, or how much is the outreach or the impact of it. Court judgments is one place that we look at. So the slaughterhouse story that I was talking about, that was primarily dependent on the legal framework that exists in the country. So laws is the other one. You can also look at case studies. They make the stories much more humane, and they make numbers much more humane. So one pet way of starting stories in Down to Earth is that we start with a case study of an individual, which is something that even most of the UN agencies also do in their reports. They have specific case studies for every in every report, where they basically give you a feel of the place and give you a feel of the, or share the experience of the individuals. So even in Down to Earth, we do that. So we start with a case study, let's say, of a farmer or of a tribal person, the kind of experience they're going through. And then we try to back it up with a big number, so that the case study makes it believable, and the numbers give you an idea of how big the scale is. So that is something that you can do. So you should also look at percentages, look at comparable data to see the aberration. So these are the basic things that you need to keep in mind when you're thinking of analyzing data, especially for communication, because all the concepts that we've talked about are very, very simple and very easily understandable. So that is basically the mantra behind any communication campaign that you can run. Keep it simple as possible. Final takeaways is that always double check the final analysis that you've come up with, especially to ensure that no biases have crept in. This happens, and I'm confident I've seen it most pronounced in researchers. So it is absolutely important that you have a final check, especially the numbers on the basis of which you're going ahead with the entire communication campaign. Also try to answer the why of the final analysis. This is one thing that happens. So this is something that even I struggled with in the initial days when I started writing with numbers. So I was so excited about numbers and the fact that I could actually look at so much numbers, so many numbers, that I started doing stories only in terms of numbers. So if a new report would come, so this is what is happening at the India level, and this is what is happening at different county or state level or different district level. So my final story would be basically a lot of numbers with some sentences or words sprinkled around it. And now when I look back and I try to read them, I realize how difficult it becomes. So if only I would have asked the why in this final analysis, that is where subject matter experts come into play, then it actually would mean be of some utility to the end user. So they would understand what is happening and how it would relate to them in a way, if it does. So that is another thing that you have to be very careful about, or you should always try to answer, because people are interested in it.